We've seen many rock stars come to faith in Jesus Christ, but the way that they did it is often very interesting. For example, there was the lead singer of the band Nickelback who had a near-death experience and woke up a changed person. Then there was the bassist for the band Disturbed who decided to surrender his life to God after getting sober. Well, today we are looking at a female rock vocalist who used to be in a band called Flyleaf. Her name is Lacey Sturm, and she has an amazing testimony, so let's talk about her story. But before we do this, I want to encourage you to join me on social media. I post videos of all the stories that I research here every day. Also, while you're there, be sure to hit subscribe. Alright, so let's dive into the story of Lacey Sturm. She was born on September 25, 1981 in Jacksonville, Texas. And when she was just 4 years old, her parents got a divorce. After her parents split up, Lacey ended up living with her father and her stepmother. But she had a pretty rough childhood because her dad would frequently abuse her stepmother and also Lacey. So Lacey was exposed to a lot of pain and dysfunction at a young age. This led to Lacey having thoughts of self-harm and even wanting to take her own life. Lacey started going to church at the age of 7, and the church gave her a sense of stability that she really needed. However, by the time that she was 14 years old, Lacey stopped believing in God. The reason for this is because her dad began physically abusing her, and she didn't think that God cared about her or had anything to say about how she was being treated. In fact, Lacey says that during her teenage years, she was angry at God and felt that he was responsible for all of her pain. Because of this, she ended up dropping out of high school and began running away from home. And when she was only 16 years old, she ended up getting married. Unfortunately, Lacey's marriage wasn't good either. She experienced physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Lacey even says that she was trafficked multiple times by her husband and that he prostituted her out to strangers. So, to get away from her husband, she joined the United States Marine Corps and became a military policewoman stationed in Iraq. While she was in the Marines, Lacey met a guy named Samir Bhattacharya, and they quickly fell in love. And eventually Lacey left the military to marry Sam, and shortly after they were married, they moved to Dallas, Texas, where Sam taught middle school. At this point, Lacey was still struggling with a lot of pain from her past. She was angry at God and was still suicidal. So, to cope with everything she was feeling inside, Lacey found an outlet through music. She began writing songs about her experiences and even started her own band called Flyleaf. And the band ended up getting very popular. Their music was played on the radio and they were able to tour around the world. Even though Lacey was now successful, her marriage was falling apart. Her husband began cheating on her and even prostituted her out again. So in 2010, Lacey and her husband ended up getting a divorce. And that same year, Flyleaf released their third album. And during this time, Lacey was dealing with a lot of personal issues, including being homeless, losing custody of her son, and even contemplating suicide once again. So she began abusing alcohol and even attempted to take her own life multiple times. But one night, while Lacey was drunk and contemplating suicide, her pastor broke down her door and saved her life. Afterwards, she stayed at a hotel room and continued drinking. But the next morning, she received a phone call from her friend who told her that she should attend a church service. So Lacey got dressed, went to the church service, and while she was there, she prayed a prayer and gave her life to Jesus. Shortly after this, she stopped drinking, picked up and moved to Tennessee, and also quit being a part of Flyleaf. Lacey then began attending church services and Bible studies, and she quickly began growing in her walk with Jesus. She says that reading the Bible was a big part of her growth, and she realized that God forgave her for everything that she had done. After giving her life to Jesus, Lacey wanted to help other women who had been through similar situations as her. So she wrote a book called The Reason: How I Discovered Truth and Purpose, and toured around the country speaking at churches and events. Then, in 2014, Lacey released her first solo album titled Life Screams. Then, in 2016, she released another solo album titled The Reason. But even though Lacey was doing well, she still struggled with a lot of anxiety and depression. She had panic attacks all the time and even felt like that she wasn't good enough for God, but over time, she learned that these feelings weren't coming from God, but rather from the enemy trying to attack her. And with the help of her friends and her husband, Lacey was able to overcome these struggles. In 2020, Lacey released another album and she continues to tour around the country and speak at events. And she is still happily married to her husband, Sam. So why is Lacey's story one that we should pay attention to? Well, I believe it's important that we look at her story for two reasons. First, I think it shows us how persistent the enemy can be. For a large portion of Lacey's life, she didn't know Jesus, and the reason for this is because the enemy had her surrounded by people who were abusive and didn't care about her well-being. You see, Satan will often use people to carry out his plans, and this is exactly what happened to Lacey. Her dad abused her, and her stepmom. Her ex-husband abused her, and even some of her band members were unfaithful to their wives. So Lacey was greatly impacted by sinful people. And if we aren't careful, Satan may use people in our lives to cause us to stray away from God. So we must make sure that we don't allow sin to be a part of our lives. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the wicked spirits in heavenly places." So we need to be aware of the fact that Satan may use people in our lives to try to keep us away from God. And we need to make sure that we aren't allowing sin to be a part of our lives. Second, I think Lacey's story reminds us that God can redeem our past. For most of Lacey's life, she felt like her past was ruined. When she was young, her parents got divorced and she experienced physical abuse. Then she had a failed marriage and struggled with alcoholism and suicidal thoughts. But when Lacey gave her life to Jesus, she realized that nothing was impossible for him, and he used her past to bring glory to his name. Lacey says that she doesn't regret any part of her life and that everything happened for a reason. She says, "I wouldn't trade my life for anything. I wouldn't take back a single second of my life because every single second, whether it was good or bad, whether I liked it or not, it made me who I am. And it brought me to this point right now." Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose." So no matter what situation you find yourself in, know that God can redeem your past and use it for his glory. If you know Jesus, please share this story with someone else. And if you haven't given your life to Jesus, I invite you to do so right now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.